following program is brought to you by the Catholic Diocese of Harrisburg and the Catholic Communication Campaign. Visit us on the web at hbgdiocese.org.
Franciscan Media and this local station present American Catholic Radio, Disciples Called to Witness. Production of American Catholic Radio is made possible by listeners like you. And now, here's our host.
Welcome to American Catholic Radio presents Disciples Called to Witness, a program designed to help you know your faith so you can grow in your faith and share it. I'm your host, Judy Zarek. You know that moment in a movie or book when you're surprised to find out that the person you thought was the bad guy turns out to be the good guy? Well, that happens in real life too, and I've been caught thinking the wrong thing when I've jumped to conclusions just a little too fast from a first impression. In one of our interviews today, we highlight a prison ministry. Now, prison ministries and outreaches are some of the least talked about ministries around. People just aren't sure if that's where they want to put forth their effort. They figure that a bad choice was made by someone and prison is what that person deserves. But Karen Vandelat and her organization look at who really loses when someone goes to prison, namely, the children of the inmates. You'll find out how paying attention to the kids and not dismissing the inmate as just the bad guy helps not only the kids, but the inmate, the prison, and eventually the whole community. As disciples of Christ, we're not called to witness just to the good guys, but to everyone. And when you hear the story about our Saint of the Week today, you'll see a woman reaching out to a group of people who were so outcast they were forced to live on their own. But first, we'll start out by listening to what Bishop David Walkowiak has to say about discipleship and the role we play in the new evangelization. Then, in my Sharing Faith interview, you'll hear from Karen Vandelat, who will fill you in on an amazing prison ministry that's touching hundreds of souls. And producer John Feaster will talk with Father Richard Rohr about how God calls us to be disciples to one another. We have a great show for you today, so let's get started and see if you can guess this week's Saint of the Week.
Who am I? Isn't it amazing how often God places us exactly where we can do the most good? Who would have thought an ordinary girl from a large, working-class German family would lead the life I did? I was still quite young when my parents immigrated to the United States in 1840 and settled in Utica, New York. After finishing elementary school, I did factory work for 9 years and helped raise my younger siblings. I used those years to think about what I wanted to do with my life. When the time was right, I let my parents know that I wanted to enter religious life. Over the next years, I was a teacher, superior of a convent, supervisor of a hospital, director of novices, and a part of my community's leadership, including provincial. In the early 1880s, I answered the call to use my administrative skills in a new way. The government of Hawaii approached many religious communities to help with people suspected of having leprosy, and our community immediately said yes. 35 of us volunteered. We knew that leprosy was one of the most dreaded diseases in Hawaii at the time, but we were convinced that Jesus was calling us to work among the lonely and hurting. In the fall of 1886, 6 other sisters and I left for Hawaii for our work at the receiving station outside Honolulu. I stayed there for 35 years. 35 rich, rewarding, demanding years. We opened a home for women and girls on Molokai. When Father Damien, now Saint Damien, became ill and could no longer continue his work, I served as administrator of the home he established for men and boys. I came to be known as Mother because of my round-the-clock, day-in and day-out love for the people under my care. I worked hard not only to make certain that they were receiving the best medical care possible, but also to brighten their lives, cheer their spirits, even add fun whenever possible. During my lifetime, we attracted many vocations among the people of Hawaii. My community still works on Molokai today. Toward the end of my life, I developed a chronic kidney disease and was confined to a wheelchair for some years. I died of a heart attack in 1918 after more than 3 decades of service. Members of my religious community, the Sisters of the Third Order of St. Francis, and followers from Hawaii attended both my beatification in 2005 and my canonization in 2012. Who am I? I am St. Marianne Cope.
You're listening to American Catholic Radio presents Disciples Called to Witness. Our Catholic faith must be reflected in our everyday lives if we hope to evangelize others. In our Sharing Faith segment up next, I'll introduce you to someone who is willing to communicate and witness that faith. Karen Vandelat is the Community Outreach Director for the prison ministry called Get on the Bus. Get on the Bus brings children and their caregivers from throughout the state of California to visit their mothers and fathers in prison.
We were founded by a nun, Sister Suzanne Jabro. Sister Suzanne arranged this trip for the women who had all gone, 6 and 7 years without seeing their children. So she arranged this bus to come up and have the kids see their moms. Many of the children were born in prison and taken away, so they were literally meeting their moms for the first time. Our program started 15 years ago with just one prison and 17 children going to see their moms at Valley State Prison. Last year we had 1,700 children and 55 buses across 11 different prisons.
Get on the Bus is supported totally through the generosity of individuals and groups.
Usually donations that come through churches. It's a grassroots model, so it's all run by volunteers, and traditionally a group of parishioners will bring us to their church, and some of the parishioners will make activity bags for the kids, and other ones will make breakfast for them, and they'll bring these children to their parish and sort of nurture them, if you will, and they pay for the bus and everything, and that's how the buses make it up to the prisons.
All the effort to get the children to see their parents is worth it, despite the fact that it happens on just 2 days a year. They go once a year on Mother's Day for the kids to see their mothers, and once on Father's Day to see their dads.
If you ask a child if they think seeing their parent one time a year is a worthy venture, I guarantee the answer will be yes. There are studies that have been done that show that even one visit makes an incredibly huge difference in recidivism numbers. Inmates without visits are 6 times more likely to go back to prison.
The visits are always very memorable for both the inmates and the kids.
It's the restorative justice that's making people whole and making these families whole again by bringing them together and having them, when we have Get on the Bus inside the prison, it's not just a free bus trip. We actually transform the visiting room from a dark, scary environment into a safe and child-friendly space where parents can read their kids' books and have different kinds of games. And so they're spending all this time. And then during the prison visit, each child and parent gets a photo of themselves together. And for many kids, this is the only picture they have. For the parents, they're taking that photo and they're going back to their cell, and they're using that as their motivation to come out and stay out. It's safer in the prisons because they're not allowed to get in trouble and still have a visit from us. And when they're in the prison, we talk to the inmates and we say to them, we're going to bring you your kids. You need to tell them that it stinks here and not to follow you here, because 60% of children with a parent in prison will go to prison themselves. Through the years of our program, we've changed the behavior and the morale amongst the inmates. And now we have wardens that are calling us, and we actually have a waiting list of prisons because they've seen the change.
All of this couldn't take place without the help of the church communities that give of their resources and their time.
To be able to come into the church and have all of the parishioners work on this project together, it's really an amazing thing to build, unity with everybody. Some of our buses have to leave at midnight for 8 a.m. visit, so some of the kids are gone for 24 hours on a bus just to have a few hours with their parent. Each time the bus stops, they're picking up families that are being cared for by Catholic parishes all the way up the state. It pulls into a Catholic church, drives 3 hours, picks up another family at a Catholic church, and that means that all of those parishioners have put together activity bags for the kids, and everyone at the parish has probably done fundraising so they know about the program, and that means the world to us to have people understand and to think about the plight of kids with parents behind bars, because I never did before.
Karen relates a story that brings to light just what this type of program can do for people and their community.
One of our bus team leaders at Sacred Heart Parish in Covina, California, who had this man come up to him during a big church function. He had a whole 5 kids behind him, and he said, "Robert, it's me." And Robert was like, "Who are you?" He said, "It's me, Eddie. You brought me my kids in prison." And he said, "I'm going to go to church here, and I'm going to raise my children in this parish." And that was a year and a half ago, and they volunteer for everything, and these kids are being brought up in this framework of this church. And, you know, that's 60% of kids that go to prison. I don't think that applies to that family now. It's really amazing to have people come out and get a second chance.
For Karen and the many volunteers that Get on the Bus, it's all about the kids.
Children deserve to see their parents, and they've done nothing wrong. Every single thing that we do is because of the children and because they have a right to be able to see and touch and talk to their parents.
You can learn more about Get on the Bus by going to www.getonthebus.us. For Sharing Faith, I'm Judy Zarek. Our United States Conference of Catholic Bishops is helping to guide us in the call to witness our faith to others. They invite us all into a deeper relationship with Jesus Christ and His Church. This week, Bishop David Walkowiak from the Diocese of Grand Rapids, Michigan, joins producer Sharon Cross and discusses how we're all called to discipleship in this new evangelization.
Our guest today is Bishop David Walkowiak of the Diocese of Grand Rapids, Michigan. The Disciples Call to Witness document refers to an invitation to experience the lifelong process of conversion. How do we define conversion? And why would it be a process and not a one-time event?
Conversion literally in Latin means turning toward. And so what we do with conversion is we turn towards the Lord. We keep our eyes fixed on Him. We keep our Lord as the compass that guides us through the life. And if you've ever seen a compass, it wobbles and it turns and it spins. And sometimes we can lose our bearings. You know, that giving ourselves over to the Lord is something that we need to renew each day. That is why morning prayer is so important, to start the day remembering that we are disciples who are called to witness, so that before we leave the house, you know, we've kind of looked over our day, been able to pick out what we're going to do, what we might encounter, what we hope to achieve, and ask God to journey with us and to help us to be able to be bearers of Christ to all those situations. And so that takes some discipline. You've got to do that every day. A lifetime of prayer, a lifetime of trying to be Christ for others is something that, with God's grace, we need to dedicate ourselves to throughout a lifetime. If we're going to witness every day, we have to be given the strength and the desire and enthusiasm to do so, and that's through prayer and renewing our conversion, our turning towards God and keeping our eyes on God.
We know from Acts of the Apostles that St. Paul experienced conversion in a very dramatic way. Is the norm for an authentic conversion experience one that is dramatic and life-altering?
Conversion can be a very incremental thing, that after many prayers, after a Christian way of living and doing Christian service, things become clear to us. And we just have the sense that God is calling us in this direction, or this is how we want to chart our lives. I would not say that the norm would be something that is dramatic and life-altering. You know, I've answered the call to a priestly vocation, but it was not a bolt out of the blue. It was something that I realized gradually after asking God to show me clearly what I was to do with my life and to be faithful in praying that prayer. And it just became a realization for me that this is something I need to try out. I think that is probably a common experience for many believers, that by being faithful to God, they realize that God is faithful to them, and that keeps us turning back to God as our reference point, our touchstone, and that it keeps us leading a life of meaning, which basically means that our life is all about Christ. It's not about us.
Pope Benedict has said that any tendency to treat religion as a private matter must be resisted, and yet that is exactly what our society expects us to do. How can we resist or overcome that cultural tendency?
We find that cultural tendency growing stronger and stronger, but we also know the results of compartmentalizing our faith and treating religion as a private matter. I think there's much more violence and self-centeredness in our society today because, people don't bring their conversion to God, their focus upon God, to the things that make up everyone's ordinary day. Common politeness, courtesy, according people reverence and respect because they are made in the image and likeness of God, and if they've been baptized, we see the face of Christ in them. Indeed, we see the face of Christ, Jesus tells us, in all people. Those who are hungry and thirsty or in prison or sick. And so by bringing our faith along with us as we move throughout our day, we can bring many good things to our society, to our culture. What that means is that we have to be willing to speak about our faith, to run the risk of some ridicule or rejection, but to let people know that faith is important to us, and that might just encourage or strengthen somebody who feels that way to find their voice and to be able to do the same thing. We do live in a society where there is separation of church and state, and that can be good in many ways, but it doesn't mean that from society and culture and life that anything that is of Judeo-Christian values has to be removed. There is much good, as we believe, in what our faith bids us do and what we believe. And so it's really important that we not give in to being bashful or being intimidated, but we find our voice and are able to tell people, I'm a Christian, these values are important to me, and they guide my life and the decisions I make.
Thanks for joining us today, Bishop Walkowiak. For Call to Discipleship, I'm Sharon Cross.
Studies show that people who pray regularly and practice their faith are healthier and happier. I'm Bishop Ronald Gaynor. I want to invite you to experience a positive difference in your life by visiting your Catholic parish and encountering Jesus through the sacraments. Do it for your family, do it for yourself, and come home. Remember that God's mercy is and always will be there for you, no matter what your situation. Visit CatholicsComeHome.org to find a parish near you.
I'm pregnant.
I can't focus.
What am I going to do with my baby?
My kids are hungry.
I can't work.
I'm scared.
I can't go home.
Can somebody
help me?
In desperate times, there's a place for hope. Catholic Charities. We help families, children, and those in crisis throughout central Pennsylvania, regardless of your faith. Providing help, creating hope. Catholic Charities. This program is made possible locally by donations to the Catholic Communication Campaign and the Diocese of Harrisburg. Visit us on the web at hbgdiocese.org.
Next on American Catholic Radio, it's time for you to guess our Catholic treasure. Can you name the liturgical feast that marks the end of the Christmas season? If you answered Mary, the Mother of God, or even the Epiphany, you'd be incorrect. The answer is the Baptism of the Lord, usually celebrated on the Sunday following January 6th. In the early centuries of the Church, the event celebrated by this feast was connected with the liturgy of the Epiphany because, like the birth of Jesus and the visit of the Magi, Jesus' baptism in the Jordan was a manifestation of the Anointed One. In Matthew's, Mark's, and Luke's accounts of the baptism by John, we hear a voice affirming Jesus as God's beloved Son. Through this event, the Gospel authors see the Father revealing Jesus as the one chosen to announce the kingdom. We are called to listen to him and accept this divine revelation. The Christmas season thus fittingly concludes with a feast marking yet another revelation of God's intervention into human history. A period of ordinary time before Ash Wednesday and the start of Lent begins immediately after the celebration of this Catholic treasure, the Feast of the Baptism of the Lord.
You're listening to American Catholic Radio presents Disciples Called to Witness. Today on Discovering Faith, producer John Feaster talks with Franciscan Father Richard Rohr. Father Rohr founded the Center for Action and Contemplation in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 1986, where he presently serves as founding director. He's the author of more than 20 books, an internationally known speaker, and a regular writer for several monthly publications. Father Rohr and John talked about experiencing God in silence and contemplation.
Richard, thanks for being with us today.
Good to be with you.
I know that you've been talking about contemplation, right? This Festival of Faiths has a lot to do with contemplation, the practice of how do we get in touch with who we are, in the contemplation. You talked about silence and solitude, how they're not really the same thing, huh?
No. Sometimes we think because we're in solitude that that's silence. And that really isn't true. Unless you've learned a discipline of what to do with your mind, solitude can actually be obsessive thinking. It often is, in fact, where you go alone just to comment endlessly in your mind. So the more important thing is silence than solitude. And once you learn the art of silence, to stop this obsessive, compulsive, repetitive, useless thinking, which is most thinking. I hate to. Once you learn how to quell that, compartmentalize that, then in fact you can be silent even in the middle of your workday. Really, that's the art form of the saints, to have found this inner true place, quiet place, real place, loving place, and from there can be very active, but they don't lose it.
So that kind of silence isn't quietness then?
No.
It's different than what we think. We think of silent, okay, the room, everybody be silent, the room's quiet.
Excellent.
That's not what we're talking about.
That's right. In other words, silence is not the absence of noise at all. It's an inner freedom not to have to judge things, pigeonhole things, comment on things, prefer things, I like this more than that. When you stop doing that, the picky mind that's constantly evaluating everything, then you have the beginnings of the possibility of inner silence.
So how do I do that?
Well, it takes years of failure, and I'm going to say years of failure before years of practice. In other words, doing it wrong again and again. Wow, I got caught up in that emotional game or that emotional inner drama because she didn't say hello to me or whatever.
Oh, yeah, sure.
It's usually that little a thing.
Yeah.
And then you build your case, and you create your commentary. You've got to see, I've wasted 2 hours on that. I'm still upset at her. I'm just picking a silly example. All right. 2 hours later, because she didn't greet me on the staircase.
But you do build your case, huh?
You
in
build
the sense
your
of
case.
a case being
That's
like,
yeah,
she dissed me.
She-
And
there-
I'd like to understand
yeah.
why. Now, what's wrong with me? Or what's wrong with her? You kind of go around in
See,
circles.
there you go. And once your ego's invested in that, it will build its case. So that person is incapable of peace. They will create dramas even when there isn't one. And we all know people like that.
Oh, yeah.
It's half the human race, I would say. That they feel alive when they have an inner antagonism or problem. Maybe that's the easier word. They really create problems. Now, I've seen myself do this. That's the only reason I understand. Why am I creating this problem? It is no problem except up here.
How then do we cultivate contemplation? Whether we're noisy people or quiet people, it sounds like we have the same challenge, huh?
We really do. Thank you for coming to the right conclusion. This is Contemplation 101. You have to recognize the problem, the extent of the problem, the ubiquity of the problem. This is how we think all day. Obsessive, compulsive, repetitive commenting on everything. Creating storylines on everything. And of course,
so guilty.
Of course it is. It creates a job for us, And we're paid for doing it. So that's why you've got to leave that world with some regularity.
For Discovering Faith, I'm John Feaster.
This is Judy Zarek here to wrap up this edition of ACR Presents Disciples Called to Witness. When I was listening to Bishop Walkowiak today, he said something that really struck a chord with me. He said, conversion can be a very incremental thing. It's not a one-time event. I think sometimes when we witness our faith to others, we want to see that aha moment shine in their eyes. We want that instant satisfaction that our words, God's words, have penetrated their hearts. But it doesn't usually happen that way. I look at the prison ministry, Get on the Bus. Through that ministry, kids get to see their mother and their father just once a year. It's not an everyday occurrence, and you wouldn't think much change would happen in just one day a year. But the cumulative effect it has over the years is very powerful. It reminds me that even though I may not see change in someone as I try to be a good witness to them, God can be working through me and slowly but surely bringing them to a deeper understanding of His love. As a disciple, I need to be patient and persistent, two things that aren't necessarily easy for me to do. So I'm glad I have some great examples to follow, such as Karen and her devoted volunteers working with the Get on the Bus prison ministry, and Sister Marianne Cope, who gave all of herself to bring dignity and love to the colony of lepers she worked with. I bet if you look around, you'll be able to find a few more examples of people in your own life who demonstrate those qualities of patience and persistence. You never know. Maybe someone is looking to you for their example. You can find ACR archive programs and more on the web at productions.franciscanmedia.org, where you can contact us and also meet our production team. Sharon Cross, John Feaster, Ron Riegler, Chris Holmes, Kim Wessamdarp, and our executive producer, Matt Wilgoss. Music for our program was composed and arranged by Bobby Fisher. I'm Judy Zarek. Join me next time for another edition of American Catholic Radio Presents Disciples Called to Witness.
American Catholic Radio, Disciples Called to Witness, is produced by Franciscan Media, a ministry of the Franciscan Friars of Cincinnati, Ohio. Production is made possible by listeners like you. Please visit our website where you can donate and find American Catholic Radio archive programs as well as other resources, franciscanmedia.org.